Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey, founders, and thank you for listening. Today, I'm speaking with Gabriel, CEO and co-founder of Openlayer, a debugging workspace for machine learning that's raised $4.8 million in funding. Gabriel, thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for having me, actually.
Not a problem. So to kick things off, can we just start with a quick summary of who you are and maybe a bit more about your background?
Absolutely. I'm Gabriel. I'm a Brazilian engineer. I live in the US now. And yeah, I'm the CEO, co-founder of Openlayer, where we work with making AI safe and sustainable. So very excited about that.
When did you move from Brazil to the US?
Yeah, so I studied here. I did my undergrad partially in Brazil and partially in the US. So I studied both in University of Brasilia and also at Cornell. And then I decided that the US had way more opportunities if you want to follow, the computer science career path. So in 2017, I moved here for good. I started my grad school at Carnegie Mellon. At some point in grad school, I was like, hey, I really want to go to industry. So I got my master's from CMU and went to work at Apple, working with machine learning and AI. More specifically, I was working on the Apple Vision Pro. For a long time, I couldn't even talk about it because it was, a secret project and couldn't talk much. But we were basically working in AI for the Apple Vision Pro. I noticed there was a gap in the industry because, building models was not the hard part. The hard part was everything around it. How do you test to make sure it's good and safe? How do you monitor it in production to make sure the performance is as good as you expect? And also, the different evaluation metrics and scenarios and tracking experiments. Doing all of that was way harder than actually building the models. So I talked with a few of my friends at Apple and like, hey, would you like to quit to start, something to fix this problem once and for all? And they said yes, and we, left to start Openlayer.
Amazing. When it comes to inspiration for you, who is the most inspiring founder that's out there for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I think it would be Henrique Dubugras. I think you actually interviewed him at some point here. And he is a Brazilian founder as well. Went through Y Combinator, and he's just like a very courageous person because he was an entrepreneur before back in Brazil. Then he was like, hey, I want to go to the big leagues. I want to go to the US to start a company as well. So he dropped out of Stanford to do it. And he started Brex. He's the founder of Brex. He started at the same time that I was in grad school. And it was a big inspiration for me because it was like someone that came from the same country as I did, doing something so cool, going through Y Combinator. So I was like, hey, okay, I'm going through industry, but I want to always keep my eye on going through IC. So actually, when we left Apple, went directly through Y Combinator, which was, a dream come true and a big part from his inspiration.
Is he like a god in Brazil?
He's very well known, I would say. I would say he's like probably the most well-known founder. I would say people really admire him because he started actually a big company in Brazil, left to start even bigger in the US. So most founders really admire him.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot to admire there. That was definitely a fun interview. And yeah, he's a fascinating entrepreneur and everything he's built is fascinating. And he's also, I think, quite young too, right? I think he's under 30, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I think he's like 27, 28. So very young guy, but very successful. So super cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. What about books? What book would you say has had the greatest impact on you, not just as a founder, but as a person?
Yeah, that's a good question because I would say like two very different answers. So in terms of personal, there's a great author like in Brazil called Machado de Assis. I know I'm doing this thing all about Brazil, but I promise it's not the case. But he had this book called The Posthumous Memories of Brás Cubas, where it's like the memories of someone that already died reflecting on their own life. And it's just a fascinating book going through like every step of your own life and like reflections about what he did right, what he did wrong and everything. And that's my favorite book by far. But in terms of, my founder journey, I would say like, it's not even necessarily a book. It became a book in the end, but like, I don't know if you're familiar with Jason Lemkins from SaaStr.
Yes,
He had this, this compilation of posts that he made on Quora, and then he created kind of a book on top of it. And this has really, really changed my journey as a founder because it's such an interesting and in-depth understanding of how SaaS business work. And I would say like, this is my go-to book. I have it on the website, also printed to have like in my hands because there's not like, an actual print version. It's an online book, but I want to have it anytime that I'm like in doubt to look and go in depth. But I don't know, I think I would really encourage anyone working in software as a service to take a look. I think it's best of SaaStr. I know this sounds weird because not really a book, but man, it's amazing.
Yeah, I follow a lot of his writing and just his content in general, and he's so good. And there's no better authority on SaaS than Jason.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's switch gears now and let's dive a bit deeper into the company. So I know we touched on that there in the intro at the start of the conversation, but let's expand on that. So when it comes to the problem, what problem does Openlayer solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the main problem that Openlayer solves is related to like how hard it is to test machine learning models. Because if you're going to test software, like normal software, you know what the output's going to be, and you have an expected input, and then you just check if one is the other, right? With machine learning, you have this statistical nature of it. So things can vary. It's not guaranteed to work in a particular way. Not always the same input will give the same output. Doesn't mean that's necessarily wrong. So how do you, create a system to test this both before you put something out there in production and also when something is already there, in monitoring? How do you make sure that things are working correctly? And this becomes even a bigger problem when you're talking about, AI and LLMs. You want to make sure you're not, if you have a chatbot powered by AI, you want to make sure that's not, hallucinating answers saying like, hey, the best way for you to get started is to join this website that doesn't exist and, click on this link that doesn't exist. This is very problematic. So our work is basically making AI, safe and performant.
Super interesting. Take us back to the early days. It looks like you founded the company in June 2021. What was it about this problem that made you say, yep, that's it. I'm going to go and dedicate my life to building a company around this, or at least dedicate the next 5 to 7 years of my life to building a company around this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like it was honestly born from frustration because it was like our jobs back at Apple to, do the error analysis of these models. Like we really would like see on the screen and keep like thinking, when does it do it the right thing? When does it do the wrong thing? What are the scenarios that it works well? Can you come up with a list of scenarios that we should always test? Can you create some kind of unit test out of it? It's like the job was super interesting, but it was also super frustrating because there was like no framework to do it. When you think about code, we have GitHub, we have GitLab, we have, different CI/CD pipelines. You have so much things that can help make your job easier. But when you talk with an ML engineer or a data scientist, usually they're using like a Jupyter notebook. They're just, writing out on this very bad, infrastructure, trying to make something work. And out of this frustration, we decided to like, let's apply with exactly this idea to Y Combinator. Let's apply with the thing that's the most painful in our day-to-day job. And we got in, decided to quit. We're a relatively young team, all in our, 20s, and we've been, having fun in the journey.
Wow, that's super cool. What did you learn from your time in Y Combinator?
Yeah, so YC has this very strong mantra, which is ship code and talk to users. And I think it's so easy to try to do other things in the early stages, try, to create a company culture or try to create, this particular very intricate marketing scheme or trying, to hire these particular professionals. When in the very beginning of the journey, when you're an early stage company, the only thing you need to do is to like, at least in technology, so is to ship code and talk to users. And I think like this insistence, like insisting on this advice for early stage companies of like, hey, we don't need to worry about culture, we don't need to worry about this or that. Of course, these are important things for a company, but in the very early stages, just focus on like ship code, talk to users, iterate, and keep doing that forever. and eventually you get there. And I think like as a founder, I mean, we all, of course, we made so many mistakes as first time founders. But whenever we are unsure about what to do next, we just think about, okay, we don't know exactly what the best next step is, but as long as we're shipping code and talking to users, we know we're going, somewhat in the right direction. So I think this was the most useful experience in YC. So it was basically 3 months of this advice, which really like get into your mind.
Let's talk a little bit about customers. So I see on the website, eBay is the logo that really stands out. So maybe we can talk about them or just any of the paying customers that you have. What's that process been like to land those first paying customers? Because that's something that all founders, all startups, they really struggle with. Yeah. How do you get first people to give you money? So what was your journey like there and what did you learn along the way?
Yeah. So for our first set of customers, we really got them from investor intros. Actually, not even investors, when we were not even fundraising, people that in the end became investors, but already believed in us, made some intros. And that's why we got our first, group of paying customers. So I don't have like a especially cool story there, but I think that one thing that we learned that was interesting in this early part is like, as a software engineer, if you went to a good school, you're a software engineer and everything, sometimes people are a little bit scared to ask for help, to ask for that new intro or to ask for what they really want. And I think becoming a founder is a very humbling experience because we learned we can't do this alone. So we need to ask for help. So we asked, people that were not even investors at the moment, be like, hey, can you intro us to that other person that we have no way to access? Can you get us there? And just by doing that, just by taking the courage of, asking for favors basically in these intros, we were able to get a first group of customers, including eBay.
Wow, that's fascinating.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
What about the competitive landscape? What does that look like today?
Yeah, that's a good question because, as you know, AI is changing a lot and changing very, very fast. So I'm going to divide things into traditional ML, traditional AI, and the generative AI boom that's been happening, lately. So I would say in the competitive landscape of the traditional ML, there is a few companies in the ML ops space. Some companies work on experiment tracking. Some companies work on monitoring specifically. Some other companies work on, testing of, ML systems. And on the generative AI space, it's a very new one. And there's a new group of, companies which they call themselves LLM ops, basically operations related to LLMs, which try to do similar things to these ML ops companies, but more focused on generative AI. So they do things like prompt tracking, prompt testing, monitoring your tokens and your, latency of your request to OpenAI or to, Cohere or other providers. So I would say our company, we were born in the traditional ML, but we noticed the change for generative AI was happening very fast. So we decided to also join this phenomenal boom. So we are in both sides. We both have, competitors on the traditional side of AI and also on the generative AI, some companies doing the prompt level operations.
What about when it comes to marketing? What are you seeing work right now? And what are you doing to rise above all of that noise that exists in this hyper-competitive environment?
That's a really good question. That's a very hard problem. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say hey, we solved this problem for good because we have the best, messaging because a lot of the pitches for AI, like LM ops or ML ops companies do sound a little bit similar. Hey, I want to make this safe. I want to make this performant. I want to make sure that you're not going to hallucinate. So one thing that we've learned is to get more direct to the point of what we exactly do. Instead of going to the abstract idea space of we make your AI safe, we try to market things more directly. For example, hey, get alerts when your LLM fails, very direct to the point. And we noticed that it strikes more authentic with a lot of our audience instead of like, hey, we're going to solve your hallucination problems on the safety AI space. We're actually trying to be like, hey, we can really help you do this thing here easier. So that's something we are always learning. But one of the things that we notice is like going directly to the point of what we actually do instead of going to the abstract world of things.
Does it feel like you've reached product market fit, or where do you stand on that journey?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question about product market fit. I actually have an interesting story. So as you know, Paul Graham was the founder of Y Combinator. And Y Combinator is one of the companies that really talk a lot about product market fit and getting there and make sure that it works. So once we had office hours with Paul Graham, we were like, hey, let's talk with him and let's like learn a little bit. And we started talking about product market fit here, product market fit there. We need to get there. And he really said, like, I don't really believe in this idea of product market fit. And we were so shocked. I was like, hey, I thought that YC, the whole thing was about product market fit. And he said, I believe in things working and companies surviving, and that's it. Like it's all about being default alive, not default dead, not necessarily product market fit. And that was like so interesting to me because I'm not gonna say that I totally agree with that. I still like the idea of product market fit, of really getting this thing that can grow fast and make things work. But I think that the definition changes so much that it's hard to say, right? I think we have a strong product in a growing market, but especially in the early stages, I think I would be like wrong to say, hey, we have product market fit 100%. I think we are learning a lot in a space that's changing every month. And I think our product clearly, our users really love the product that we have built. If that's product market fit or no, we're going to learn in the next few months, but I think that's where we stand right now.
Makes a whole lot of sense. As I mentioned there in the intro, you've raised almost $5 million to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this process and throughout this journey?
Yeah, I mean, we learned a lot about fundraising, especially through Y Combinator and also through other founders. What I would say is like all about, I think there are three things that, at least in this, seed early stage, that investors really care about, which is the team, the market, and, the proof. So basically, like, you have a strong team that can execute. Is the market big enough so it makes sense to execute on this market? And what's the proof so far? What's the progress that you have made that shows that this team can perform in this market? And we focus our whole fundraising on showing these three things, on showing like, hey, we're a strong team out of Apple that have really dealt with this problem before several times. The market is huge and is growing even more. And now, as you can see with the whole AI boom, it's like basically every company is becoming an AI company. So it's a huge market. And also focus on like, hey, in this very early stages, we're able to get, these early customers, big brands and everything. So I think it's a compelling story from the beginning.
Let's imagine you were starting this again today from scratch. What would be the number one piece of advice that you'd give to yourself?
I would say to just ship code and talk to users. Don't get distracted with anything else. Although we did 3 months of Y Combinator to tell us that, I would say it's still easy to get distracted. And especially because we started in 2021, when it was this crazy year of venture and things happening here and there. It's easy to lose track of what really matters because do your users love your product? Especially in the early stages, more than revenue, more than anything else. It's do people really love your product? And it took a while for us to figure out that and be like, hey, this is the only thing that matters now. Later, we can care about the other problems. And now we're super happy because, we have a good group of people that really love what we're doing. And we're so excited for the next, phase of our journey.
Let's talk about that next phase of the journey for our final question. So let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What is that big picture vision that you're building?
Yeah. So our vision is that any company using AI has confidence on what are the things that my model does well, what are the things that my model does not do well, and what are the remedies that I'm using to fix that in particular. So I feel like a lot of the ML and AI nowadays, people just put it out there in production and hope and pray that things work out. And what I really want to change is like, hey, I'm putting this out in the world. I know it does really well on, for women in this kind of household with this level of income, and it does really poorly for men between 12 to 19 years old in this other sector of society. And I know the shortcomings, and I have the guardrails in place to make sure it's not going to happen. So basically, to become the guardrail of the AI revolution. Ideally, people think about OpenAI and Cohere and all of these companies building these huge models and think like, okay, what's our Openlayer stack to be able to mitigate all the issues that are going to come naturally from deploying this? So basically, like the way that people think about code and creating tests, unit tests, or CI/CD pipelines, they're going to be thinking the same on AI, but using Openlayer.
Amazing. I love the vision, and I've really loved this conversation. We are up on time, so we'll have to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders that are listening in and they want to follow along with your journey, where should they go?
Yeah, you should go to our LinkedIn, Openlayer, and also my personal page, Gabriel Bayomi. I'm always mostly reposting Openlayer stuff. So yeah, excited to connect with folks.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Really appreciate it. And again, really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Keep in touch.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.